Our next guest is a prize-winning economist that argues that the entire democratic process really is in need of a radical reform. Dr. Dambisa Moyo joins us today. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about your latest book, The Edge of Chaos. I read it with great interest, but also fear.
Oh no.
Because are we on the edge of chaos?
Well, you know, like most of my books, there's a solution. And at the bottom subtitle that people don't really focus on says how to fix it. And so it's not designed to elicit fear. It's designed to encourage us to focus on what I consider to be the most important economic headwinds that we're dealing with, and to ensure that these long-term economic challenges, from demographics to income inequality to natural resource scarcity, but issues also around debt and the amount of debt that these nations are carrying, are issues that public policy is focused on. These are long-term economic issues that are deeply embedded in the economy, and yet we have myopia and short-termism embedded in the political process. So essentially the book is trying to make sure that this schism or mismatch between long-term economics and short-term politics is bridged, and that's what's really important.
Right, and in the book you outline 10 radical reforms. I know we can't go through all of them today, but if we have to choose the top three, I know one of them is, you know, making voting mandatory, for example.
Yes, so there are 27 countries around the world that have mandatory voting, countries like Australia, Belgium, Greece, and the participation rates of voters are much higher, perhaps unsurprisingly, because there are fines if you don't vote. In places like these countries, the participation rates are above 80%, very often even above 90%, whereas in the United States we see participation rates around 50%, and in fact for low-income households as low as 30%. So very far off from that one man, one vote mantra that we know regarding liberal democracies. And I think the consequences of that are quite dire, because what you end up with is basically a narrow voting parties, and I think that means that policymakers and politicians very naturally try to steer the political agenda towards the people who are voting and not towards the broader societal base. And so I think it's really important that we get those voter participation rates up.
So Dr. Moyo, do you feel this has to come from the public or private sector, this initiative?
Well, I think that ultimately it's about citizen engagement, and so I really hope that people will read the book and take away the need for us as voters not only to get more engaged, but also to be much more participatory in terms of our knowledge of what the political system is like. What are the key issues beyond sort of personalities? What are the key issues that are on the ballot box?
No, really a fascinating read, which I urge everyone to get a copy of. I just want to go back to our interview last year during the PDAC in March 2017. You were struggling to be bullish on global growth. 1 year later, how does Dr. Moyo see it?
Well, you know, clearly in the short term, and I think I made this point last year as well, in the short term there's a lot of reasons to be quite euphoric. We're seeing decent numbers in terms of unemployment. We're seeing inflation at bay, and the GDP numbers seem to be ticking over. However, the longer term, and in fact the IMF has just in the last few weeks talked about how they think that in 2020 we'll start to see a global slowdown. The first quarter of this year we started to see some softness in industrial production. So those types of structural concerns, and of course the eternal question is where the heck is inflation? I think those type of issues are still looming in the global economic debate.
Well said, Dr. Moyo. Edge of Chaos, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.